Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the American Association of Political Consultants, I'm excited to welcome you to our virtual seminar, Influencers at the Ballot Box, How Online Creators Shaped the 2024 Election. I'm Anna Ross from the AAPC team, and I'll be your facilitator today. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available in our member archive. If you're not yet a member and would like to join, please visit the aapc.org for more details. Today's seminar will run for approximately 45 minutes, and the panel will take questions at the end of the program. So be sure to submit your questions through the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will address as many as we can during the session. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Larry Huynh, AAPC President and Partner at Trilogy Interactive. Larry, please take it away.
Thank you, Anna. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to dive right in. I don't want to, we have so much we want to talk about. This is an exciting topic, and we can have many, many sessions about it. And I've already been talking about having at least 1 to 2 more conversations about this at the Polys conference in May. So hopefully folks do come to that. Again, I'm Larry Huynh, President of the Association. I want to introduce our 2 great panelists. Maria Giannopoulos has been at the intersection of marketing, digital media, and politics for over a decade. This cycle, Maria served as the Director of Marketing and Digital for the 2024 RNC convention, where she pioneered the first on-site influencer program known on social media as Greek Maria. She is an influencer in her own right with over 1 million views on her TikTok live streams. Maria is also a Senate and Google alum. Welcome, Maria, and thanks for joining us. Ryan Davis is the co-founder and COO of People First, the most experienced creator agency in politics, having collaborated with nearly 20,000 creators since 2019. People First is a Higher Ground Labs company and publishes a monthly Substack on influencer communications for campaigns and nonprofits. Prior to founding People First, Ryan was the first social media director at Blue State and a member of Howard Dean's 2004 presidential campaign web team. Welcome, Ryan. So thanks for you both joining us. We're going to dive right in. I thought it might be helpful for us to level set a little bit, because when people talk about creators and influencers, so many different things come into people's heads. So I want to get a common fact base if possible. So Ryan, I'm going to toss it to you just to set the stage for us.
Totally. So People First, we work on the Democratic side of the aisle. We partnered with about 3,000 creators this cycle, reaching 32 million users organically. When we add paid media into that mix, we got an additional 50 million impressions. Next slide just gives you an idea of the kind of clients we work with, from the presidential into issue advocacy, Senate, et cetera. But what I really wanted to talk about was the difference between the 2 kinds of creators that you can partner with. This is sort of interesting. We did a study where we were able to have a bunch of creators go live in Virginia for a statewide race, ingest all the followers of those creators, and then had a bunch of creators who didn't go live with content, and ingest all the followers of those creators. And we ran a study to see what do people following creators actually get from this content. And this was just people posting a single time. And we saw that there was a 27% bump in Democratic recall for folks who followed creators. But on the next slide, you'll see that folks that were used Instagram frequently, so more than 2 times a day, had a 45% bump. So the more likely, the more people were online, the more they saw the content, the more that the recall worked. So if we go to the next slide here, I want to talk about the differences between the political and non-political creators. On the next slide, what we did was we took 20,000 followers who were from creators who went live and worked with us on a campaign this cycle who were non-political. So these might be folks who talk about travel, health, family, et cetera. Then we took 20,000 random followers of folks who are identified by Wired magazine as political creators shaping the 2024 election. And we looked at both who those followers were and what they were talking about. So you go to the next slide. And you'll see that there was a huge difference in the bios of folks who were following non-political influencers versus following political influencers. So if you were following a political influencer, you had words like political, director, founder, advocate, writer, media, etc. You had words like that in your bios. If you were following a non-political influencer, you had completely different words: travel, family, business, author, adventure, book, health, lifestyle. Totally apolitical, non-political words. On the next slide. When we actually look into what those followers are talking about, the people who were following political influencers were having these massive conversations about the election, about Kamala Harris, about Donald Trump, about very specific things, generally political. And this makes up really like 35–40% of the conversation. But on the next slide, we see that the non-political creators were talking about everything besides politics. So these are the followers of those non-political creators. They're talking about school, they're talking about moving, they're talking about music, their business, basically just conversations about normal stuff, and not having a conversation about politics. So what does that mean?
People only talk about politics. What are you talking about?
Yeah, the people in my bubble, they do. But this is sort of what we're trying to do, is break out of these bubbles, right? So if you go to the next slide, I think that there are value in both of these creators. If you're working with a political influencer, that's somebody where you're in a primary, or you're trying to push a message to your base, or you're trying to raise money, get out the vote. On the non-political side, reaching everyday people who are not political junkies, and reaching them where they are on social. So I think as we go into this conversation, thinking about the value in both those non-political creators and those political creators and what they can bring to the table. So thank you for that, Larry.
Very quickly, I think of political influencers, base, grass tops type individuals, non-political creators, you're saying low propensity, sort of lower information on politics, not uninformed, just on politics, they may be uninformed, right? And I think we need to create that separation. It's not like specifically a prototype of anything other than their attention to our issue that we live and breathe. So that, I think that's a great context. I want to then now shift it, because I do think that's a really important thing for the audience to understand the differences in these types of creators and how they can serve your purposes depending on what your goals are. So let's talk about some specific examples of work. Maria, I'd love for you to talk about an example and what you guys were trying to accomplish in a specific project, and the types of creators you were reaching out to accomplish that.
Sure. So this cycle was, of course, very important for content creators, being at the intersection of digital and politics for a long time. These are things that I know both Ryan and I have probably advocated for years, but are finally coming to the forefront, which is very exciting. So this cycle, we pioneered the first influencer program at the Republican National Convention. And we didn't just stick to those political creators. Of course, we had the typical folks that you would see, your Ben Shapiro's, your Benny Johnson's, those kind of folks that come out and are very active in the political space. But then having people like the Nelk Boys come to the convention and be active on the campaign trail, they aren't necessarily posting political content all the time. I think, a lot of the creators that we reached out to dabble, of course, but there were people that we reached out to, lifestyle content creators. We had two guys who have an exclusive gaming platform at the convention. So really reaching out to people who were non-traditional in the political world really gets to that constituent base that we were really hoping to connect with throughout the campaign. And you could see that all throughout to November. You saw the president go on Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan, of course, he has been somebody who has been very outspoken about what he thinks, what he believes, but people don't necessarily view him as a political creator. So seeing people like Joe Rogan, you see Aiden Ross, you see Bryce Hall, you see folks like that who aren't necessarily political, but the president was on their platform. I don't want to necessarily talk all about what happened on the presidential level, because I think there is some great stuff going down ballot and working on campaigns with influencers there. But that's what we really aim to do in kind of kicking things off with the convention. Sort of the first time that influencers actually had a space to be able to produce their content, to be able to set up their tripod, their light. And you even saw that with the announcement, was that yesterday, 2 days ago, from the White House, actually offering a seat to podcasters and influencers at the White House briefings. So really great stuff, and going to continue on with that as we go forward.
Well, go ahead, Ryan.
One of the things I think that the Trump White House is already doing in a really interesting way is turning their cabinet secretaries into content creators. So you've got examples of I think it was Kristi Noem who was in the ICE outfit and creating like a video. And I think we're about to see a very different sort of approach to communications, where you're going to have basically everybody's a content creator. I think Wired called it the Trump cinematic universe, that we're really about to see a different way of communicating. And I think we're already starting to see that out of the White House.
I mean, at some point, her hair will be its own creator. I think there's, it is fantastic and very intentional, right? I think there's very things that people are doing here. But Maria, how did you guys? So you guys are reaching out to these folks. Can you put a finer point on why and then how you measured success? Because I think our audience just being very clear about like, what's the point? Like, what were you trying to get here? And did you get it?
Yeah. What's the point of reaching out to these folks and giving them a platform and a space? It really is because the president talks directly to people every single day. And on social media, you don't typically get the spin that comes on all of the different news networks. You get the information right from the source. So that's exactly what we were doing in reaching out to content creators. It's bringing people who are just setting up their camera and showing you what's happening, showing you those behind the scenes moments, giving you a taste of what's happening, not through a huge filter with, a bunch of studio lights and cameras and all that kind of stuff, but really giving you exactly what's happening there. And I think that authenticity is exactly what this president shows every single day. But of course, measuring that success is, how many people were we actually able to get to come? And this wasn't us reaching out and saying, hey, we'll give you money to come. No, all of these influencers came on their own dime. They believed in the message of the president and showcased their content to their followers. And, really that exponential reach is what we measured success on.
And Ryan, sort of something you brought up, and just the point is, like, there are these people who follow these non-political creators are a different segment of the population and either lower propensity or lower information on politics. But it doesn't mean that the creators, even if they don't talk about it on a regular basis, aren't involved or care about politics, right?
I mean, I think it's just a lot more work to find somebody who's a gardening creator who then wants to make a post about politics. And the way that we've done it and we've seen it work is, you find a creator who's all about fishing, and you say, hey, you care about public lands, you care about the environment. And so they're able to make that connection with their audience through what they do. So I think when you can find a creator who has a niche or something that can be tied to an issue that helps your candidate or your cause, that's like the most effective way to do it. I also think, if you have a candidate who's willing to go and be part of these non-political conversations, that's really valuable on, running from, livestock commissioner on up to the presidency. There are local podcasts, there are local Substacks, there are these conversations that you can be having outside of your traditional sort of legacy media that might still exist or not exist in your town. And I think that the future is being very proactive about getting on having these conversations with folks.
Totally. Ryan, I think you bring up a really good point about advocacy and, kind of it's always about meeting people where they are. And I've seen that a lot with the TikTok ban in particular. A lot of content creators, there's baking content creators, fashion, lifestyle, all of these folks who are suddenly really in tune with what's happening in the political landscape because of what's happening on TikTok, and bringing their small business to the forefront and the issues that they care about to actually advocate for something that is political. So you can kind of see that if there is something that really does affect their livelihood, their community, then it's a really easy way to kind of foray them into, whatever issue may be affecting them and kind of bring them into the fold.
Ryan, do you have, you brought up the challenges of, say, finding a non-political creator to talk about political, or somehow bring their audience and be credible, by the way, so it doesn't come across as false. Do you have an example of something you did last cycle, and how you went, like, what was the point of the project? What were you asked to do, and then how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think if we look at like the Bashir for governor race that we worked on, the reelect, that was interesting because it's Kentucky. It's not a place that you think about necessarily for social media creators, but what we were looking to do was to find coal miners, truck drivers, nurses, folks who could speak about Andy in a really in a real common sense way, and sort of grant that permission structure that even if you're a Republican, it's okay to vote for Andy. And so that's an example of going out and finding these folks who are not talking about politics all the time, asking them if they're supporting Andy, and then getting into what the creative ask is. So we have a technology that helps us identify folks and do outreach, but when you're getting folks to talk about things like politics who are not used to talking about politics, it's a lot of hand-holding and collaboration to make them feel comfortable to sort of take that step. And then we also we pay our creators for content that they make.
Right, but again, you're paying for access, frankly, to their creativity because they're creating the content, right? You're also paying for access to their platform, their universe of supporters or viewers or followers, or things like that. You're not paying them for their support.
Yeah, you're never paying enough money where that's where really that's going to be the thing that pushes them over the edge, right? But we do find that you're paying for the actual time to collaborate and create the content, access to publish that content on their platform, and then the rights to use that content in paid media or on your other branded channel. So those are the three things that person's doing. And it's quite frankly, it can be a bit of a lift to make a piece of content. Some campaigns are giving a lot of feedback, too much feedback, really, you could say. Yes. But you have to kind of be willing to make multiple edits to your content and post in a timely manner. So we find that a small payment really helps make that happen. And when you're working with a creator who's got 500,000, 600,000 followers, all of a sudden you're talking about obviously a lot more money because their reach is bigger than you would get like a local TV buy.
Well, that relates to a question that we had, and I think it's Maria, you brought it up, and Ryan, but so how would you compare sort of these micro influencers, or sometimes I like to call them meso, because they have enough. It's not like they're tiny. They're not like 3 people, but maybe it's a few thousand as opposed to a million. Micro influencers compared to like these major social media figures in terms of impact and voter engagement. Like how do you sort of divide? I think, how would you measure their impact, or think about how you might use one versus the other?
I think about people in terms of engagement. You could have millions and millions of followers, but if you only get maybe a couple hundred people that are engaging with your stuff, then what is that reach? Is it just people just kind of scrolling by, or are they actually taking in your content and seeing what it's all about? So sometimes micro influencers can be really helpful because they have a more engaged audience. You know, I even think about my own audience. I don't have millions of followers, but I do have a very engaged audience and a really loyal audience. People asking me questions about my day-to-day life. And, of course, I work in the political world. So a lot of people that follow me are people that work in politics. So kind of thinking about, people might have these massive followings, but what does that interaction look like? I think that's a huge piece to look at when you're thinking about these types of campaigns. But it's also, how are you bringing them into the fold? How are you bringing them into a coalition? I sort of think of influencers as surrogates. They really are, because in the political world, it's not just, hey, sell me this skincare. It's you actually have to believe in the things that you're saying in order to put them out there. So I kind of think of them as surrogates in a sense.
Ryan, do you have anything to add on that? Sort of the megas, people
Yeah.
think about, well, I'm not gonna go get Kim Kardashian, and most of the time that's not what we're getting either. So like, what, how do you think about the differences and how are they useful?
Yeah, I mean, I think capital I influencers or celebrity influencers are great. They have a lot of reach and get you a lot of quick impressions. But I think that there's too much focus on the size of a following, and to Maria's point, not enough focus on the quality of that following and the engagement that creator is getting. So, if you're looking to reach young voters of color in Metro Atlanta, if we go out and recruit, a handful of young voters of color who are going to make really compelling content, even if they don't have a lot of followers, and then we take that content, we put it up on programmatic and we boost it on social, and we're putting it up against the voter file against other young voters of color, that's going to get extraordinary engagement. And so I think it's a mistake just to think about the content that's going live on that creator's account, but to think about all the ways you can use that content and sort of the bottom-up creative approach that you can have now by having all this kind of cool, content really geared towards your audience segment. So instead of working with one big creator, work with a handful of smaller creators, get a lot more content that you can sort of throw up against your audiences.
Can I just help clarify for, I think, our audience about this paid piece? Because you mentioned it earlier about like licensing content, but it's and how you do that. So when you say put it in paid, what types of paid are you talking about specifically? And how do you get there? That seems to be something you need to think about up front, as a part of the plan, right?
Yeah. So there are different ways you can do it. First, you have the creator's asset. So you've got the 30-second vertical video. And so you can take that and you can put it up on your programmatic provider. You can use, DS Political's Deploy, and you can use that video and put it up on websites and online video and streaming. You can also, if you have enough time and you're kind of working slowly, you can work with the creators to get through that meta authorization process so they can actually have a political disclaimer on the content. And then instead of that ad coming from, at Barack Obama, it's coming from at Larry, and it feels like a much more authentic sort of thing. And so you're being Larry and you're out there and you're scaling that content. So those are the ways I think that it's a very influencer 1.0 way to think about it, as only the you work with the influencer, that content goes live and you walk away. No, then that's only the beginning. Then it's like, what's that content's life going to be after that?
And it's like potentially you can use it for paid. You also can have situations where you have creators bounce off each other and they collab and things like that as well, right? So you leverage content in multiple ways. So again, I think it's really important not to think about the content in a very simple way, that in the world, especially the creator world, once it's out there, there are lots of different ways it can get used, right? And in the same way, we should be thinking about that politically as well. I want to step back and folks, if you have questions, please throw it in the Q&A. Helps me have to come up with fewer questions, so I appreciate that. But also there are times where that question it's useful to come in over the course of the conversation. So folks, feel free to jump in there. Let's take a quick step back to the presidential, and I don't want to spend a ton of time. I only want to contextualize the presidential so that we can talk about how people can use those things in their own campaigns, because people always assume, I can't do that. I don't have a, 200, 400, 500, $1 billion campaign. It's like, but what did you see in the presidential, on either side? You don't have to, that you really thought, okay, this is how they use it, and I thought this was smart. And conversely, what did you think that, I'm not sure why they did that, and I wish they would have, I think that was a mistake. So you can take one or both of those angles, but I just love to hear very quickly from you, your thoughts on at the presidential level, what you saw with content creators. I'll throw it to whoever wants to take it first. Maria, go.
Awesome. Well, of course, I have a lot of thoughts on the presidential. That's what I focused most of my time on this cycle. So, I think President Trump is somebody who is the earned media president. He is constantly telling people what they, where they want to hear things directly from him. And whether that's sitting down with Elon Musk, I thought that was actually one of the best parts of the campaign. Trump sitting down with Elon for 3 hours, just unfiltered, shooting the shit back and forth. That's what they were doing. And I thought that was an incredible way to get across how the president really cares about his issues, but also showing that he's not reading off a script. He's just there talking with Elon. And I thought that was really powerful and showed a lot of contrast during the campaign for sure. I think going back to a point that we had a little bit earlier about sort of mega influencers and celebrities versus, run of the mill, maybe micro influencers or even everyday people. I think that one thing that we saw on the Harris side of things was sort of this reliance on the celebrity. And I think we definitely saw that backfire a little bit. People saying, well, how can Taylor Swift relate to me when I can't buy my groceries, things like that. So I think sort of over reliance on, big name celebrities. We on the right haven't always had the luxury of, having celebrities on the team. So I think over reliance maybe wasn't the best tactic, but I do see that authenticity is always going to win the day. And, just kind of seeing the landscape, not just being there and showcasing, what you have to say on a 3-hour X Spaces or on Joe Rogan or on a podcast, I think was done really, really well. So, excited to have been a small part in that.
And, I think the celebrity thing, look, Joe Rogan is a celebrity, and Beyonce is a celebrity. They're both big celebrities. But the difference in, Beyonce giving that great speech is, with Rogan and Trump, you had, to your point, you had these long conversations. So instead of just being like an endorsement, you had Rogan sort of humanizing Trump and Vance and having these like conversations about, wrestling and about policy and all the things, all the reasons that people like Rogan. And I feel like the Harris campaign, even her like less political interviews were still very political in nature. And we never really got to see her and feel comfortable with her as a character. And obviously Trump is like a very talented media personality. He's been going on Stern for probably 30 years, right? So he's really good at these kind of like conversations. And I think he was just set up for success in that media environment.
He's a great communicator.
Definitely.
Even kind of thinking about the Call Her Daddy interview with Kamala, I watched it, of course. I've watched Call Her Daddy as a listener, and I was expecting a little bit more of the sweatshirt, classic Alex Cooper. And it really was a very substantive conversation about reproductive rights. So I think that it sort of surprised me a little bit, to be honest. And then, of course, the Rogan podcast came after that, but definitely a huge contrast for sure.
Well, I think it comes to something that I think comes up a lot of times. Someone asks a question about like how, maybe over prescribing the things that you want a creator to say, and sort of the idea that I often like to tell my clients, like, can you hide the peas in the mashed potatoes type things? It can't just look like a pile of peas, even if I like peas, but for the most part, that's not going to play. So what is it how do you manage that? Because we have a question here about, like, how do you deal with a creator unexpectedly goes off message? And the question I would have is, what is the message, or what is off message when you're dealing with creators? And should there even be an off message if you're allowing them to be authentic?
I think that this is an example of different ways Democrats and Republicans view this. Democratic clients that I work with are very lowercase c conservative about picking the creators, vetting the creators, and what the creators have to say. We even have clients who will give us scripts that the creators will read. Obviously, when a creator is reading a script, they're not doing it in a way that speaks in an authentic way to their audience. So we definitely argue for giving folks more flexibility around messaging. Obviously, there are messaging, there are talking points. When you work with an agency like us, you have final say over what that video is, so you can feel comfortable before it goes out. But my message to all campaigns and causes would be to give up a little bit of that creative direction, a little bit of that messaging direction, give the creator that space, and you're going to have a much more compelling, authentic piece of content.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I also think about, just when you're thinking tactically about how you're going to deploy these campaigns, especially if you're working with a candidate or something like that, I would definitely create one step of distance away when you're deploying some of these campaigns, because yes, a creator could 1 minute be on the team, and then 2 weeks later, something could happen, and maybe they're going rogue and saying something that you're like, ooh, maybe not. So I would say kind of creating that one step of distance by utilizing different agencies. And, I think many of the folks on this call are those agencies. So, providing that to your clients, I think, is something that's really important. But also, I think one thing that we did on the convention, and you kind of see that with the White House too, it's the opportunity to have access. It's not the opportunity to, say, here's your script and this is what you're going to say. It's the opportunity to have a seat at the table versus a partnership on what they're going to say. And I think that's a huge difference, because allowing somebody the space to create their content or the space to ask a question in the briefing room is not the same as doing a influencer campaign. And I think that those are some distinctions that you can draw with some of your candidates. Maybe it's not, hey, we're going to pay this influencer to do this, but it's how are we going to bring them to the table so that we're not feeding them a script, but they're just here and covering the trip that we had to the border or the manufacturing floor. So that's maybe a little bit of a nuance and a difference in approach that I think Republicans have taken, that might just be a little bit different.
Let me put it this differently. Would you say one of the goals of why you would do a creator, and this gets into why should a campaign do it? How would you convince a client? How would you convince a campaign manager? Or if there's a campaign manager on the other side over here, like, why should they do? Isn't part of it to get a type of media in front of people that is more authentic, more sort of native to them? And so if that's the point, if you then overly prescribe talking points, then you lose, or you're hurting actually one of the initial goals of doing this at all. Would you agree with that viewpoint?
Yes. I mean, let's face it, traditional media it's dying. And you can see that with the viewership of Election Day, of the conventions, all of those things. More and more people are consuming their media online. They're scrolling short form content, watching, political things on YouTube, on all sorts of platforms, and not so much traditional media. And how do you reach those folks that aren't on those platforms, that aren't seeing those TV ads? So that's that's the way to convince a campaign manager or a GC or the person who controls the purse strings, because how else are you going to reach these folks? Because more and more people have cut the cord. It's gone. So how are you reaching them?
So how can, and there's a question here that how can a campaign, because this is probably more the Democrats because we're so careful about this. It's like, how can campaign protect themselves from like backlash or misinformation concerns, or if someone goes rogue, like what do you do? Like you worked with someone, they were way on your, and then they went way off the rails, which is totally possible, right?
Yeah, so we've worked with thousands and thousands of creators, and thankfully, knock on wood, I can count on one hand like the number of times that we've had creators really go off the rails. So especially if you're working, you have like a agreement with them. They have like there's non-disparagement in the agreement that we're working with. So like people generally behave. We're vetting them before to make sure they are who they say they are, and they haven't said anything that would be upsetting for our clients in the past. So in the same way, when you hire a canvasser, how do you know that canvasser is not going to go door to door and be crazy? They might. But how do you know that your press secretary won't? So it's there's always some risk, and I don't think the risk with creator is any greater than any of these other positions we're talking about.
Definitely agree.
Greater, but you do have to accept increasing the number of vectors you have out there where something can happen, right? I mean, to be fair to that perspective, right? You're increasing maybe the points of failure you might have.
It's just not that interesting a story, though. It's just not that interesting a story these days. Like when we first started this in 2020, there were so many stories about how XY campaign is paying creators, and we got zero of those now.
That's over. Yes.
It's not as I guess it's not as novel now. Now, I kind of said this a little earlier, but thinking about just the longevity of being in this industry, going from, the e-newsletter to the web content team to the new media, like, all the iterations that we in the digital world have gone through in the political industry, I think have sort of led us to this point where people finally recognize, like, hey, we do have to take this seriously. We should put money behind these things. We should put programs in place that actually cultivate relationships with podcasts and creators and things like that. So that's, why you probably don't see as much of that anymore. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a way to I think crystallize this for our audience. Could you answer, and maybe this is a terrible question, so forgive me if it is, but it's like, give me an example of, say, something that a campaign may need to accomplish. Like, what's a good example of a need that a campaign has where creators would be a great or a very good solution for it? And then in addition, the follow-up question to that is that someone's going to ask us, like, how much do I need? How much money would I need to do something like that? Like, what are my table stakes if I'm going to get in here in terms of cost, right? Because not everyone's a presidential that can draw people who will just want to do it, right? You are paid is a real part of this, and I think especially down ballot or not presidential.
Well, even the Harris campaign, Hardside paid creators locally in the last few weeks. Yeah, so they probably should have done that earlier. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that realistically, smaller campaigns, they need content. They need content that speaks to their specific audiences. So, if your target is suburban women, find some suburban women creators. If your target are young voters, find some young voters. Think about it from a content perspective. So, can I use this in door knockers? Can I use the audio for this in podcast ads? And all, it's like, think about how you can take that media and use it in other ways. And then, in terms of pricing, we have small campaigns that start at 10,000 and then go all the way up to, in the millions, depending on how many creators, how big the creators, et cetera. But it can be, we've done a lot of state campaigns. It could be something that really fits well into a state or larger city budget.
if say they couldn't afford a campaign to do it, like how would they individually go find? Could they go out and say, "Hey, I found this person. They post a lot
Yeah,
about my area. Do they just reach out to them? Like,
just
how
read.
would
Yeah,
they go? How would some?
that's how you all start.
One thing that's really powerful about being a candidate most times is you get a little check on a lot of platforms as somebody who's officially running for something. So, I mean, even some of the creators that I worked with on the convention, I just DM'd them. That's really so simple. You just DM them, and if they're interested, and they'll message back. I had several creators who I got to come to the convention just because I DM'd them. So, if you are working on a scrappy budget, which we all are in politics,
Always.
that's a great way to, get somebody who you're interested in. Also, think about, especially when you're thinking about local races and stuff like that, who does the campaign team follow? Who are the people in their communities that people are looking to? Yeah, I lived in Milwaukee for the last year. There are content creators that I follow because I was living in Milwaukee to let me know the cool thing to do on a Friday night. Those types of folks are really, really helpful to leverage. And if you're an authentic follower of them, you could say, "Hey, I follow your stuff. It would be great to partner on this." And maybe they'll say yes.
There's always, you get this pushback. I always love this on some level because I don't always feel like other mediums are measured this way. But there's an ROI question. I can start a question about ROI on linear broadcast TV, and we can have that long conversation. But there's always an ROI question because all of a sudden so we're gonna ask the question: how do you measure it? Like, how do I know I've been successful if I do this? And it's a
You win. That's really it. I'm kidding. Yes, there's the winning component. But it's how did you move the numbers with a particular audience is really how to measure the ROA. It's the same way that you measure ads. We don't have the luxury in politics of saying, "Here, click on my affiliate link," and then you can show how many sales came from that link. We are in the business of persuasion and getting people out to vote. So that's the way that you can measure your success. Same way that you measure all ads success.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, your traditional digital KPIs here, and like we've run those studies where we've surveyed folks, and they're expensive and bulky to run, so we don't always get a chance to do that. But I think that this to me is like an extension of surrogate speaking. It's an extension of digital relational organizing. It's an extension of social. It's so many different types of comms sort of brought into one unit.
Yeah, I think that's what people have to understand, that it is serving multiple roles in a campaign, that many of those roles don't have specific ROI either, but they're important. Relational, media, this is some hybrid of relational and earned and organic and paid, and all those things sort of wrapped in one. I think the other thing that people should, and we haven't put up that, if you look at the numbers of where people get their media and get their content and their time that they spend versus you compare it to very traditional things, and you don't always ask, well, why did I work to try to get this story placed, or I'm trying to get on this program? These sort of non-traditional, and I include podcasts in there, like, are way outpacing traditional media in terms of viewership and attention span and eyeballs. So I think that is just those are the facts, and people don't question. If someone said, "Hey, I'm going up on on CNN," people are like, "Okay, that sounds great," but should they? Because you would be asking the same question about spending time on some of these creator platforms. So I think it's where the eyeballs are is a big part of this, right? I know we're running on short on time, Anna. If you tell me to shut this down if you need to, because I could talk about this for a long time. And Ryan and Maria, you've been great, and there's so much more that we didn't get to. So I think maybe, can I ask one last question? Like, and I just want to give Maria and Ryan just the platform to, like, what would you leave the audience with? Just if you have one quick thing about creators and how to use it, or whether they should or not, can you leave the audience with one last parting thought?
I think my last parting thought would be just think about the kinds of creators you want to work with. Try to work with some non-traditional folks and get out of your media bubble.
Definitely. I think my last parting thought is it's always important to be authentic and reach people where they are, and where people are online. And that is increasingly more and more, as we all know, as folks that work in the digital space, but advocating for that in all forms for resources, budget, etc., is, I think, the next battle that we're here to take on.
Well, thank you, Ryan and Maria. This was a great conversation. I feel like we barely talked, which is a good sign. It means it was very enjoyable, and you guys did a great job. And I am going to hand it back to Anna. Thanks, audience. We appreciate your time. I really wish we had more, and I'm sorry we didn't get to every question, but you can find these folks in other means, other areas, and we can help facilitate that. And on behalf of the AAPC, I want to thank you for your time. Anna?
Yes, thank you so much. That does bring us to the end of today's seminar. Thank you for joining, and a special thank you to our presenters for your wonderful contributions. Today's program will be available for playback in the AAPC webinar archive, so keep an eye out in your inbox for an email with the recording link. Before you go, a quick survey will pop up on your screen at the close of this webinar. We'd really appreciate if you could take a moment to share your feedback on today's program. And also don't miss our upcoming events, including the Orlando Networking Lunch. That's next Tuesday, February 4th in Orlando, Florida. For more details and registration, visit our website or email us at info@theaapc.org. Thank you once again to our panelists and attendees. This program is copyright 2025 by the American Association of Political Consultants. All rights reserved. This concludes today's webinar. You may now disconnect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.